My 14-year-old daughter uses a wheelchair. On a hot day, she sat by the community pool. She wore her swimsuit and put her feet in the shallow water to cool off. She was happy and smiling. Then Karen from the HOA came fast. She yelled, "No wheelchairs at the pool! You make it dirty! You break rules!" My daughter said in a quiet voice, "I am only cooling my feet. I will be careful." Karen got very angry. She grabbed the wheelchair from behind and pushed it hard into the deep water. My daughter fell in. She could not swim well. She moved her arms and tried to call for help. Only bubbles came up. Her eyes looked scared. Karen stood by the pool and said, "Now you learn the rules." She looked happy about it. She did not know the strong man running from the house was my daughter's father, a Navy SEAL back from work. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you are watching from, and please hit subscribe for more stories where the good guys always win. The afternoon sun sat high and bright above the community pool, turning the water into a sheet of rippling light. It was one of those quiet summer days where everything felt slow and warm, the kind that made people linger outside just a little longer. My 14-year-old daughter sat at the edge of the pool in her wheelchair, her feet resting gently in the shallow water. She laughed softly when the cool ripples touched her toes. She liked moments like this, simple, calm, predictable, moments where she could just exist without being stared at or corrected. She wasn't splashing. She wasn't blocking anyone. She wasn't bothering a single person. She was just enjoying the water. I sat a short distance away, watching her with the quiet awareness that never really turns off when you're a parent, especially when your child depends on you a little more than most. I was relaxed but attentive, letting her have her independence while staying close enough to help if she needed me. She smiled at me and waved, proud of herself for getting comfortable on her own. Then the mood shifted. Footsteps approached quickly from behind the pool gate. Sharp, deliberate, impatient. The sound alone carried tension. I looked up just as Karen from the HOA came into view. She walked like she had somewhere urgent to be, even though she clearly didn't. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. Her eyes were already narrowed. She stopped a few feet from my daughter and crossed her arms. "You can't do that," she snapped. My daughter startled slightly and looked up at her. "I'm just sitting," she said softly. "I'm not in the pool," Karen scoffed. "That wheelchair doesn't belong anywhere near the water." "You're breaking the rules." My daughter blinked, confused. "I'm just cooling my feet," she said, her voice quiet and careful. "I'll be really careful." Karen stepped closer. "I don't care," she said sharply. "Rules are rules." I stood up slowly, watching the situation change before my eyes. Something in Karen's posture, the stiffness, the anger, made the air feel heavier. "She's not bothering anyone," I said calmly. "She's allowed to sit there." Karen didn't even look at me. "She's contaminating the area," she snapped. "This is a shared space. People like her don't get special treatment." The words landed hard. My daughter's shoulders dropped. Her hands tightened on the armrests. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean—" "You shouldn't even be here," Karen interrupted, her voice rising. "You're making things difficult for everyone." A few people nearby had started to look over. A couple of teenagers paused mid-conversation. Someone sitting under an umbrella frowned. The atmosphere shifted, not loud yet, but tense. I took a step forward. "That's enough," I said evenly. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Karen turned on me, eyes flashing. "You HOA people always think you're above the rules," she snapped. "This community has standards." "She's a child," I said, keeping my voice level, "and she's allowed to be here." Karen shook her head, visibly irritated. "You're not listening," she said. "This is exactly why things get out of control." Then she did something that made my stomach drop. She reached toward the back of the wheelchair. It happened fast, not a shove, not yet, just a sudden grab at the handles, like she meant to move it herself. "Hey!" I shouted. My daughter gasped. The chair shifted slightly, just enough to make the water ripple and her body jolt forward. She cried out in fear. "Daddy!" Everything in me snapped into motion. I ran. At the same moment, a lifeguard across the pool shouted, "Ma'am, stop!" Another person lunged forward from the nearby chairs. The wheelchair tipped just slightly, not into the pool, because two hands grabbed it at once. One was mine. The other belonged to a teenage lifeguard who had sprinted from his stand. The chair steadied. My daughter was shaking hard now, clinging to the armrests, eyes wide with fear. "I'm scared," she cried. "I'm scared." I dropped to my knees beside her instantly. "It's okay," I said, wrapping my arms around her. "You're okay. You're safe. I've got you." She pressed her face into my shoulder, trembling. The entire pool area had gone silent. Karen stood frozen a few steps away, her hands still half raised as if she hadn't quite decided what she meant to do. "I was just trying to move her," she said sharply. "She shouldn't be there." The lifeguard stared at her in disbelief. "You can't touch someone's wheelchair," he said firmly. "Ever. She was breaking the rules." Karen shot back. A man near the chair stood up. She wasn't hurting anyone. Another woman added, "What is wrong with you?" My daughter clutched my shirt tighter. "She scared me," she whispered. I held her close, my heart pounding, anger and fear mixing together in my chest. I looked up at Karen. "You don't get to scare my child," I said quietly. She scoffed, but her confidence had begun to crack. "I didn't hurt her." "You tried to move her," the lifeguard said. "That's not okay. Phones were out now." People were recording. Murmurs spread through the pool area. Someone said, "Call the police." Karen's eyes flicked around. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I'm just enforcing the rules." "Not like that," someone replied. My daughter pulled back slightly and looked up at me, her eyes wet. "Daddy, I thought I was going to fall." I swallowed hard and brushed her hair back gently. "You didn't," I said. "You're safe. I promise." She nodded, still shaking. The lifeguard spoke into his radio, calling for assistance. Karen crossed her arms again, but her voice had lost its sharpness. "This is all being blown out of proportion," she muttered, but no one agreed. The crowd had shifted, not loudly, not angrily, but decisively. People stood closer to us now, forming an unspoken barrier. In the distance, sirens began to rise. Karen heard them too. Her jaw tightened. She glanced around, suddenly aware of how many people were watching. The lifeguard looked at her firmly. "Ma'am, you need to step back." She hesitated, then took one small step away. I stayed kneeling beside my daughter, one arm around her shoulders. "You did nothing wrong," I told her softly. "Nothing at all." She nodded, wiping her eyes. The sirens grew louder, and in that moment, before the officers even arrived, something shifted. The shouting was gone. The anger had drained from the air. All that remained was the truth, standing plainly in the open, witnessed by everyone. Karen stood alone near the edge of the pool, no longer in control of the moment. She had tried to assert power. Instead, she had revealed herself, and she had no idea who was about to step forward next, because the man kneeling beside the frightened girl, the one holding her close, steady and calm, was not just her father. He was a Navy SEAL. And this was only the beginning. For a few seconds after everything happened, time seemed to hesitate. Not stop completely, just slow enough that every sound, every movement, every breath felt louder and heavier than it should have. The pool water rippled softly, disturbed by the sudden movement near its edge. A few drops splashed over the concrete, glinting in the sun. My daughter clung to the armrest of her wheelchair, her breathing uneven, her eyes wide with shock. She wasn't crying loudly anymore, just small, shaky breaths that told me how close she had come to panic. I stayed kneeling beside her, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. "You're okay," I whispered. "You're safe. I've got you." She nodded slightly, pressing her forehead into my shoulder. Behind us, the world was waking up to what had just happened. People stood frozen in place, unsure whether to speak or move. A few had risen from their chairs. Someone had stood up so fast their towel fell to the ground. A pair of teenagers stared openly, mouths half open. The lifeguard was already halfway across the deck, eyes fixed on Karen. "Ma'am," he said sharply, "step back." "Now." Karen looked around as if only just realizing how many people were watching her. "I was fixing a problem," she snapped. "That wheelchair doesn't belong there." Her voice echoed strangely in the open space, too loud, too sharp. The lifeguard stopped a few feet from her, his posture rigid. "You do not touch someone's mobility device," he said firmly. "Ever." Karen scoffed. She was about to fall in. "That's not what happened," someone said from the crowd. Another voice followed. "You scared her." She was sitting there peacefully. Karen's jaw tightened. Everyone needs to calm down, but no one did. The mood had shifted. What had been casual afternoon chatter was now thick with disbelief and anger. People were no longer passive observers. They were witnesses. My daughter stirred slightly in my arms. "Daddy," she whispered, "am I in trouble?" The question landed hard. I pulled back just enough to look at her face. "No," I said firmly. "You didn't do anything wrong. Not even a little." She searched my eyes, trying to make sense of everything. "I was just trying to cool my feet," she said softly. "I know," I said. "You did nothing wrong." The lifeguard Crow ooched down on her other side, keeping his voice gentle. "Burr, you're safe," he said. "We've got you." Burr, she nodded, still trembling, but reassured by the calm tone. Burr, behind us, Karen threw her hands up. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're all acting like I attacked someone." "Burr, you grabbed the chair," someone said. "I barely touched it." "Burr, that's not okay," another voice answered. Burr, lifeguard stood and turned fully toward Karen now. "I need you to step back from the pool area," he said firmly, "right now." Burr, Karen hesitated. "Bar, I have authority here," she snapped. "I'm on the HOA board." Br, the lifeguard didn't raise his voice. "Bar, this is a safety issue. Step back." Burr, for a moment it looked like she might argue again. Her mouth opened, then closed. She glanced around at the growing number of people watching her. Phones raised, expressions hard. Reluctantly, she took a step back. Burr, the air felt tight, as if everyone were holding the same breath. I stayed beside my daughter, my heart still pounding. My hands were steady, but only because I forced them to be. "You're doing great," I murmured to her. "Just keep breathing with me." Burr, she nodded, trying to match my slow breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Bar, gradually her shaking eased. Bar, the lifeguard, spoke quietly into his radio. "Front pool area, we need assistance." Karen's head snapped toward him. "You called the police?" she demanded. He didn't answer her. A few seconds later, the sound of distant sirens reached us, faint at first, then clearer. The effect was immediate. Karen's posture changed. Her shoulders stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the entrance of the pool area, then back to the small crowd forming around her. "This is unnecessary," she muttered. "I didn't do anything illegal." No one responded. The sirens grew louder. My daughter noticed them and looked up at me, worry flickering in her eyes. "Bar, Daddy, are we in trouble?" "No," I said softly. "They're coming to help. That's all." She nodded slowly, trusting me, even though fear still lingered in her expression. A woman from a nearby chair stepped closer and draped a towel around my daughter's shoulders. "Here you go, sweetheart," she said gently. "You're safe." "Thank you," my daughter whispered. I met the woman's eyes and nodded in gratitude. The siren stopped abruptly outside the gate. A moment later, 2 uniformed officers entered the pool area. They didn't rush. They walked calmly, scanning the scene, taking everything in. The cluster of people, the lifeguard, the wheelchair, my daughter wrapped in a towel. One officer approached us first and lowered himself slightly so he wasn't towering. "Hi there," he said kindly. "Are you okay?" My daughter nodded again, though her voice was still soft. I got scared. "That makes sense," he said gently. "Thank you for telling me." He glanced up at me. "Are you her parent?" "Yes." "Can you tell me what happened?" I explained carefully. How she had been sitting quietly. How Karen had confronted her. How she had grabbed the wheelchair. How it had shifted suddenly. The officer listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. Behind him, his partner was already speaking with witnesses. "I saw her grab it," one man said. "She yelled first." Another added. There was no reason for it. Karen stood a few feet away, arms crossed tightly, her face flushed. "This is being blown way out of proportion," she said loudly. "I was enforcing rules." The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, I'll get your statement in a moment," she scoffed. "I don't need to give one. I didn't do anything." The officer remained calm. "I still need to hear from you." She sighed dramatically but didn't argue further. The officer knelt again briefly beside my daughter. "You did the right thing, telling us what happened, He said. "You're not in trouble." She nodded, gripping the towel. The second officer approached and quietly spoke to his partner. They exchanged a look, not dramatic but meaningful. The officer then turned toward Karen. "Ma'am, based on what we're hearing, we need to continue this conversation formally." Her eyes widened slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means you'll need to step aside while we sort this out." "This is ridiculous," she said. You're making a big deal out of nothing. The officer remained steady. Please step over here. She hesitated, looking around as if searching for support. No one spoke up. Slowly, reluctantly, she stepped away from the pool. The air felt heavy. My daughter squeezed my hand again. Daddy? I'm right here, I said. You're okay. The officers guided Karen a few steps away so they could speak with her privately. Their voices were low, controlled, professional. Around us, people murmured quietly. Some shook their heads. Others whispered to each other. The lifeguard stayed nearby, watchful. The moment stretched on, tense but contained. I stayed kneeling beside my daughter, grounding her, keeping my focus where it belonged. And then, as if the day itself exhaled, something shifted. The shouting was gone. The chaos had settled. What remained was truth, witnessed, recorded, impossible to ignore. The sun still shone on the water, the pool still shimmered, but nothing felt quite the same anymore. And as I held my daughter close, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: this moment would not be dismissed. Not this time. The moment the officers separated the small group near the pool, the atmosphere shifted again. Not louder, not calmer, but more focused. The kind of quiet that settles in when people realize something serious is happening, and words now matter. The officer nearest to me finished speaking with my daughter and gave a small, reassuring nod before standing. His partner had already begun speaking with a few of the people who had been sitting nearby. One by one, voices began to rise, not in shouting, but in testimony. I saw her grab the wheelchair, a middle-aged man said, gesturing toward Karen. She came up yelling before anything else happened. A woman in a sun hat stepped forward. The girl was just sitting there. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Another voice chimed in. She looked scared. Anyone would have been. The officers listened carefully, writing things down, occasionally asking short, clarifying questions. They didn't interrupt. They didn't rush. They let people speak. Karen stood off to the side, arms folded tight against her chest. Her face was rigid, jaw clenched. She looked less angry now and more defensive, like someone realizing that control was slipping away. I told her to move, Karen said sharply. She ignored me. One of the officers turned toward her, calm but firm. We'll get to your statement in a moment, ma'am. Karen huffed and looked away. I stayed where I was, kneeling beside my daughter. She had calmed a little but still leaned into me, her fingers lightly gripping my sleeve as if to anchor herself. I could feel the tension still moving through her body in small waves. You're doing great, I whispered. Just stay with me. She nodded, eyes moving carefully from face to face as people spoke. The lifeguard stepped forward. Next. I saw everything from my chair, he said. She approached the girl aggressively. There was no safety issue until she made one. I yelled for her to stop. One of the officers wrote that down. Did you see her touch the wheelchair? The officer asked. Yes, the lifeguard said without hesitation. She grabbed it. That's when I ran over. Karen shook her head sharply. That's not what happened. The officer met her gaze calmly. You'll have your chance to explain. Nearby, another witness, a teenage boy, raised his hand slightly. I was sitting right there, he said. She was yelling first. The girl looked really scared. His voice cracked slightly at the end, and he swallowed before continuing. She didn't do anything. The officer nodded, jotting down notes. The crowd had grown quieter now, attentive in a way that felt heavy but respectful. No one was filming anymore. Phones had lowered. The moment had crossed from spectacle into something more serious. My daughter shifted slightly, then looked up at me. Daddy, are they mad at her? She asked quietly. I took a breath before answering. They're listening, I said. That's how they figure out what really happened. She thought about that for a moment. They're listening to everyone? Yes. She nodded, satisfied with that answer. The officer returned to Karen. Ma'am, I need to hear your version of events. Karen straightened her posture, clearly trying to regain composure. She was violating the pool rules, she said. Wheelchairs aren't supposed to be that close to the water. I told her to move. She didn't listen. I tried to help. Help how? The officer asked. I tried to move the chair back. Did you touch it? Karen hesitated. I may have placed my hands on it, but... And did you push it? The officer asked evenly. Her jaw tightened. I didn't mean to cause a problem. That's not what I asked, the officer said, still calm. Karen exhaled sharply through her nose. I may have pushed it a little, she admitted, but she wasn't listening. A quiet murmur rippled through the small crowd. The officer nodded slowly and wrote something down. Thank you, he said. That helps clarify things. Karen's eyes widened slightly. That's it? She demanded. You're just writing it down? We're documenting all statements, he replied, including yours. She folded her arms again, suddenly quieter. Another officer approached me. Sir, I need to ask you a few questions as well. I nodded and answered carefully. When I'd arrived, what I'd seen, what my daughter had told me, how quickly everything had happened. He listened attentively. And your relationship to her? He asked. She's my daughter. He nodded. And your occupation? I'm a Navy SEAL, I said evenly. His expression changed just slightly, not surprise, but recognition. Thank you, he said. That's helpful to know. Karen overheard. Her head snapped up. You're what? She asked sharply. I didn't answer. The officer did. He's her father. Karen's face lost color. The confidence she'd been clinging to wavered, just for a moment. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The officer turned back to her. Ma'am, based on multiple consistent witness statements, we need to continue this investigation formally. What does that mean? She asked, her voice tighter now. It means you'll need to remain here while we complete our report. Depending on the findings, further steps may follow. This is unbelievable, she muttered. I was just trying to enforce rules, the officer replied calmly. Enforcing rules does not include touching someone or placing them at risk. The words hung in the air. Around us, the pool had gone completely quiet. Even the splashing had stopped. My daughter leaned her head against my shoulder. Daddy, she whispered, is it almost over? Almost, I said softly. You're doing great. She nodded and let her eyes close for a moment. The lifeguard returned with a clipboard, adding his written statement to the growing stack of notes. Another officer took photographs of the area. The wheelchair's position, the pool edge, the surrounding space. Everything was careful, methodical. This wasn't chaos anymore. It was process. Karen Schiff. Ted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. She tried once more to speak. I think you're all overreacting, she said. This could have been handled privately. The officer met her gaze. Ma'am, when public safety is involved, it becomes a public matter. She looked away. The wind stirred lightly across the pool, sending ripples through the water. Sunlight reflected off the surface, dancing across the concrete. My daughter opened her eyes again and watched the reflections quietly. They're pretty, she murmured. I smiled faintly. Yeah, they are. She took a slow breath, calmer now. The officer finished writing and closed his notebook. Thank you all for your patience, he said to the group. We'll be taking the next steps from here. He turned back to Karen. Ma'am, please come with me. She hesitated again, just a fraction of a second, before complying. As she walked a few steps away, she glanced back once, her expression unreadable. No one spoke. The moment passed without drama, without shouting, just consequence. I felt my daughter's grip loosen slightly. She leaned into me and whispered, Daddy, it's quiet again. Yes, I said softly, it is. The pool shimmered in the sunlight, undisturbed now. The voices had faded, and what remained was the steady, grounding presence of people who had chosen to speak up, and a truth that had finally been heard. The air around the pool had changed. It wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't chaotic. Instead, it felt heavy, like everyone present understood that this moment had crossed an invisible line and there was no going back to how things were before. The officers stood a short distance away, speaking quietly into their radios. One of them glanced over at me, then back at his notes. The other scanned the small crowd that had formed, taking in faces, expressions, and the way people stood. Tense, alert, watchful. My daughter stay. Ed close to me, her fingers wrapped around my hand. She wasn't crying now, but she hadn't let go either. Her thumb rubbed slowly against my knuckle, a small, repetitive motion she always did when she was trying to calm herself. "You're doing great," I whispered. She nodded without looking up. Across the pool deck, Karen stood rigidly near a bench, arms folded tight across her chest. The confidence she'd shown earlier had faded into something brittle. Her jaw clenched and unclenched as she watched the officers speak with witnesses one by one. The lifeguard handed over his written statement. "I saw her grab the chair," he said calmly. "I shouted for her to stop. She didn't." One of the officers nodded and added the paper to his folder. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat stepped forward next. "I was sitting right there," she said, pointing to a chair near the fence. The girl was minding her own business. The woman came in angry. Another voice followed. Then another. Each account matched the last. Karen shifted her weight from foot to foot. "That's not how it happened," she muttered. "They're exaggerating." The officer turned toward her again, his tone still controlled. "You'll have the chance to explain fully. Right now, we're gathering information." She sighed sharply and looked away. I could feel my daughter relax slightly as more people spoke up. The tension in her shoulders softened just a bit. She leaned closer to me, resting her head against my arm. "They're helping," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "They are." One of the officers approached me again. "Sir, I need to ask a few clarifying questions." "Of course." He glanced down at my daughter, then back at me. "She's your daughter?" "Yes. And you were present when the incident began?" "I was nearby. I saw what happened." He nodded. "And your occupation?" I hesitated only a second before answering honestly. "I'm active. Duty Navy." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "What's your role?" "I'm a SEAL." The officer didn't react dramatically. He simply nodded once, acknowledging the information, then made a note. "Thank you for your service," he said quietly. "And thank you for your cooperation." Karen overheard. Her head snapped up. "You're military?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. I didn't respond. The officer answered instead. "He is?" For the first time since this began, Karen looked genuinely unsettled. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She glanced around at the watching neighbors, the lifeguard, the officers. The certainty she had arrived with, the belief that she was in control, was visibly slipping. She folded her arms tighter, as if bracing herself. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said again, but her voice lacked its earlier bite. "I was just enforcing rules." The officer looked at her steadily. "Rules don't allow you to touch someone or put them at risk," he said. "That's not enforcement. That's interference." She looked away. The officer turned back to his partner, who nodded slightly. "We're going to need to continue this formally," the second officer said. "Ma'am, please come with us so we can complete the report." Karen hesitated. "Am I being arrested?" she asked. "At this moment, you're being detained while we determine next steps," he replied evenly. Her breath hitched. "This is ridiculous," she said weakly. "I didn't mean anything." No one responded. The silence around her was louder than any argument. She slowly stepped forward, escorted a short distance away so the officers could speak with her privately. Their voices were low, controlled, professional. I stayed where I was, my hand still resting protectively over my daughter's. She looked up at me. "Dad, am I in trouble?" "No," I said immediately. "You didn't do anything wrong." She searched, my face needing to be sure. "You promise?" "I promise," I said, meeting her eyes. "You were brave. You spoke up. You did exactly what you should have." She nodded slowly, then leaned into my side again. The lifeguard returned and knelt nearby. "You okay?" he asked her gently. She nodded. "You were really brave," he added. "That wasn't easy." A small, shy smile flickered across her face. "Thank you." The pool area had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not tense, not confused. It felt resolved, like a storm that had passed and left the air clearer behind it. A few neighbors lingered nearby, whispering to each other. "I can't believe she did that. She's always been like that," someone should have said. Something sooner. Their voices were low, reflective. The officers finished speaking with Karen and turned back toward us. "Sir," one of them said to me, "we're going to document everything and follow up. There will be further steps, but for now, she won't be interacting with anyone here." I nodded. Thank you. He paused, then added, Your daughter handled herself very well. I looked down at her. She looked tired but calmer now. Thank you, I said quietly. The officer stepped away. Karen was guided toward the exit of the pool area. She didn't resist, but she didn't look back either. Her shoulders were stiff, her posture defensive. No one said anything as she left. The gate closed behind her with a soft metallic click. That sound, small and final, seemed to mark the end of something. The lifeguard exhaled slowly and glanced around. Okay, everyone, he said gently. Let's take a few minutes. Pool will reopen shortly. People began to move again. Some returned to their chairs. Others gathered their things and left quietly. The normal sounds of summer slowly crept back in. Splashing water, distant laughter, the hum of cicadas. I stayed where I was, still kneeling beside my daughter. She watched the water for a moment, then looked up at me. Daddy? Yes? Is it over? For today, I said softly. Yes. She nodded, thinking. Then she said, I'm glad you came. I swallowed. I'll always come, I said. Every time. She smiled, small but genuine, and in that moment, surrounded by sunlight, by witnesses who had spoken up, by the quiet presence of accountability, I knew something important had happened. Not just justice, not just resolution, but a reminder that when people choose to stand together, even quiet courage can stop harm before it grows. And that truth, once spoken, has a way of changing everything. The pool area felt different once the officers finished speaking with everyone. Not quieter exactly, just steadier. The kind of calm that settles in after something difficult has been acknowledged out loud. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, chairs scraped softly against concrete. Someone gathered their towel and left without a word. The moment had passed, but its weight remained. My daughter stayed close to me, her fingers still curled around my sleeve. She wasn't shaking anymore, but she hadn't let go either. I didn't rush her. Some fears take time to loosen. Across the deck, Karen stood near the gate with an officer beside her. Her posture was rigid, chin lifted as if she were trying to hold on to dignity through force alone. The confidence she'd arrived with was gone, replaced by something brittle and uncertain. The officer spoke quietly to her, not harshly, not kindly, just professionally. He explained the process, the next steps, the expectations. His tone never changed, even when she interrupted. I was only trying to keep order, she insisted. Someone has to enforce rules around here. The officer nodded once, writing something down. Enforcement doesn't include physical interference, he said calmly. That's why we're here. She pressed her lips together, clearly unhappy with the answer. Nearby, another officer finished speaking with witnesses and approached his partner. They exchanged a few words under their breath, then both looked toward me. One of them stepped closer. Sir, he said, we've gathered multiple consistent statements. We'll be documenting this fully and submitting it for review. I nodded. Thank you. He glanced down at my daughter, then back at me. She handled herself very well. I felt a quiet swell of pride and relief at the same time. She did, I said. The officer hesitated slightly before continuing. For now, the individual will be issued a notice and escorted out of the area. Further action will be reviewed by our department and the HOA board. I nodded again. Understood. Behind him, Karen's voice rose briefly. This is ridiculous, she said. I've lived here for years. Everyone knows me. The officer replied evenly. Length of residence doesn't change responsibility. That seemed to deflate her more than anything else. She fell silent. The gate opened, and she was guided out of the pool area. Not dramatically, not forcefully, but firmly. The sound of the latch clicking shut behind her carried an unexpected sense of finality. No one cheered. No one jeered. The moment wasn't about spectacle. It was about closure. My daughter watched quietly as the officers walked her away. Dad? She asked softly. Yes? Is she going to be mad forever? I considered the question carefully. I don't know, I said honestly. But what matters is that what she did was taken seriously. She nodded, absorbing that. People aren't allowed to scare others, she said. No, I agreed. They're not. The lifeguard returned, clipboard tucked under his arm. Pool's closed for a bit, he announced gently. We'll reopen shortly. A few people nodded and began gathering their things. Others lingered, exchanging quiet words. One woman approached us hesitantly. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry you went through that, she said. You both handled it with a lot of grace. Thank you, I replied. She looked at my daughter and smiled kindly. You're very brave. My daughter gave a small, shy smile in return. Soon, the area began to clear. The officers finished their notes and approached us one last time. Sir, one of them said, you'll likely be contacted in the coming days for a formal statement. If you have any questions or concerns, here's my card. He handed it to me. Thank you, I said. He nodded once more at my daughter. Take care of her, I will. They left shortly after, walking back toward their vehicle. The pool area was almost empty now. Sunlight shimmered on the water again, undisturbed. The earlier tension felt like a distant echo. I crouched down so I was eye level with my daughter. Do you want to go home? I asked. She considered it, then nodded. Yes. I helped her turn her wheelchair carefully, moving slowly, making sure she felt steady. As we headed toward the exit, she glanced back once at the pool. It was nice before, she said quietly. I know, I replied, and it can be nice again. She nodded, seeming comforted by that idea. The walk home was quiet. Not heavy, just thoughtful. The late afternoon sun had softened into gold, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. A breeze rustled the trees, carrying the faint smell of summer. Halfway home, she spoke again. Dad? Yes? Were you scared? I paused for a moment before answering honestly. Yes, I said. I was. She looked at me with surprise. But you were calm. I smiled slightly. Sometimes being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, I said. It means you do what you need to do anyway. She thought about that. I think I was brave too, Aid. You were, I said without hesitation. Very brave. Her shoulders lifted just a bit, pride flickering through the lingering fear. When we reached home, I helped her inside and settled her onto the couch with her favorite blanket. The familiar surroundings seemed to ease her immediately. She sighed and relaxed back against the cushions. I brought her a glass of water and sat beside her. Outside, the neighborhood had returned to its usual rhythm. Distant lawnmowers, passing cars, the low murmur of life continuing. Inside, the house felt safe again. She looked up at me, her voice soft. Is everything going to be okay? I met her gaze. Yes, I said, it is. She studied my face, searching for certainty. Finding it, she nodded. Okay. She leaned back, eyes growing heavy. I stayed with her as she rested, listening to her breathing slow and steady. In that quiet moment, I understood something deeply. Accountability doesn't always come with raised voices or dramatic endings. Sometimes it comes through calm steps, clear boundaries, and people choosing to do the right thing, even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it comes through witnesses who speak up, through officers who listen, through systems that, when they work as they should, protect the vulnerable instead of dismissing them. And sometimes it comes through a child who finds the courage to say, I was scared. That evening, as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the living room, I sat beside my daughter and let the quiet settle around us. The hardest part was over. What came next would be handled carefully, deliberately, and with care. And for the first time since it all began, I allowed myself to believe that things would truly be okay. The sun was already lowering when we finally left the pool. Not suddenly, not in a rush, just quietly, as if the day itself understood that it had taken enough. From us. The air had cooled slightly, carrying that late afternoon softness that makes everything feel slower and more thoughtful. My daughter sat beside me as we moved down the path toward home, her wheelchair rolling smoothly over the sidewalk. She was quieter now, not frightened anymore, just tired in the way children get after something emotional passes through them. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers gently tracing the edge of her towel. Neither of us spoke for a while. Sometimes silence is not empty, sometimes it's full of things settling into place. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had, trimmed lawns, parked cars, a few people watering plants or closing their gates for the evening. But it felt different now, like a layer had been peeled back, like something unseen had finally been acknowledged. When we reached our driveway, she looked up at the house and then back at me. Can we just sit for a minute? She asked softly. Of course, I said. I guided her toward the shaded spot near the porch, where the air was cooler. I sat beside her on the step, close enough that our shoulders touched. The quiet hum of insects filled the air. Somewhere down the street, someone laughed. Life continued, gently, persistently. She took a deep breath. "Daddy?" she said. "Yes?" "I was really scared today." I nodded slowly. "I know." Her voice dropped a little. "I didn't know if anyone would help." That one hit deep. I turned toward her fully, lowering myself so we were eye to eye. "Listen to me," I said gently. "You were never alone, not for 1 second. Even when you didn't see me yet, I was already coming." She studied my face carefully, as if testing whether the words were solid enough to stand on. "You promise?" she asked. "I promise," I said without hesitation. She nodded, satisfied, and leaned her head against my shoulder. We stayed that way for a while, listening to the quiet. Eventually she spoke again, her voice softer now. "Everyone was watching." Yes," I said. "I didn't like that." I know," I replied. "That can feel uncomfortable." She was quiet, then said, "But some of them were nice." They were," I agreed. "They spoke up. That matters." She thought about that. "So, it's okay to ask for help?" Always," I said, "especially when something doesn't feel right." She nodded slowly, absorbing it. Inside the house, the light was warm and calm. I helped her settle onto the couch and brought her a glass of water. She took small sips, then rested her head back against the cushion. Her eyes looked heavy now, not sad, just tired. "Can I rest for a little bit?" she asked. "Of course." I pulled a light blanket over her legs and adjusted the pillow behind her back the way she liked. She sighed softly, already beginning to relax. I sat nearby, watching her breathing slow into a steady rhythm. The events of the day replayed in my mind, not sharply anymore, but like echoes. The raised voices, the moment of fear, the way the crowd had gone quiet, the way people had stepped forward, and then the way things had calmed. Accountability isn't loud, I thought, It doesn't shout or demand attention. It settles in quietly, through procedures and records and follow-up conversations, through people choosing to say, "That wasn't okay." My phone buzzed softly on the table beside me. A message. It was from one of the officers who had been there earlier. "Just an update. Report has been submitted. HOA notified. Follow-up will be handled formally. Hope your daughter is doing okay." I read it twice, then set the phone face down. There was nothing else to do tonight, and that was okay. I looked back at my daughter. Her eyes were closed now, her breathing even. She looked peaceful, the way she always did when she finally felt safe enough to rest. Outside, the sky shifted through soft shades of gold and blue. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of wind chimes from somewhere nearby. I thought about how quickly things can change, how an ordinary afternoon can become something heavy, and how, just as quietly, things can begin to heal. Later, as the evening deepened, she stirred slightly. "Dad?" she murmured. "I'm here," I said immediately. She opened her eyes just a little. "Will tomorrow be normal again?" I smiled gently. "Maybe not exactly the same," I said, "but it'll be okay. We'll take it one step at a time." She considered that, then nodded. "I like that," she said sleepily. Her eyes closed again. I stayed there long after she drifted off, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, feeling the weight of the day finally begin to lift. Outside, the neighborhood had settled into night. Lights glowed softly behind windows. Somewhere down the street, a door closed. A car passed. A dog barked once and went quiet. Life continued, not pretending nothing had happened, but carrying forward with a little more awareness than before, and that felt right, because what mattered most wasn't anger or punishment or confrontation. What mattered was that a child had been heard, that people had stepped in, that harm had been stopped, and that safety, real safety, had been restored. I reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from my daughter's forehead. "You're safe," I whispered, and for the first time since the day began, I truly believed it.